Okay, so it's lovely to see you all, and thank you for kind of joining us. I will share some slides in just a minute, but I thought I'd give a quick intro to who I am. So my name is Greer, and I'm from the US. I grew up nearish to Seattle, but now I live in the UK. I live in, I call it boring Birmingham. It's just a very, very normal city. I used to live in Oxford, so that's partly why I call it boring Birmingham. But I live here with my husband and my two kids, which today you will likely hear them in the background because they're off school today. And my husband, who normally doesn't work on a Thursday, is working today. So that is life. Um, and I always say we're just lifing today. So if you hear them, if you ever hear them screaming, just know that they're totally okay. They're just boys who like to wrestle. I promise they're not dying. Um, but that is me. So a little bit of my story is my oldest son was diagnosed with autism and ADHD about 4 years ago. And when that happened, uh, our my world just spiraled, and I went through depression because I felt like our world had ended. And just that reality of what does our future look like, especially because a lot of my friends around me um, didn't really know what our everyday looked like. And so uh, it was just really hard. And so um, over that kind of period of time, I always like to say that that kind of 6 months where it was really difficult for us. It was like I was dropped into a pitch black maze and told to get out. And because of Jesus and the hope I have in him, he was a light that helped me. And over time, I got to build a community of people who, offered their light. And so I was able to kind of walk out of that maze. And one thing that taught me was how I don't want anyone else to feel alone in this. And one of the ways that I saw most was how the church as a whole really struggled with this topic and has struggled with this topic. And it kind of sent me on my journey um, to looking at how we, again, global church, can really be a welcoming place because some of the statistics are really scary to think about how churches are not welcoming for neurodivergent families or those who have additional needs. Um, one statistic, so one statistic is 50% of families every Sunday leave the church. 50%, sorry, let me start again. 50% of families with additional needs in the US and in Canada, this is where the stat comes from. So those who have additional needs leave the church every Sunday, which is heartbreaking to think. Christian families, these are Christian families who want to go to church, who want to be there, are leaving because they don't feel welcomed. They don't feel like those things are being catered for. And so I want to change that. That's my goal is to change that statistic because I see that here in the UK. I've talked with at this point I've talked to hundreds of people on this topic around neurodiversity and neurodivergent brains, and um, not all of them are Christians. Let me just clarify, but a lot of them are, and kind of that idea that this is happening around the world, and I want to change that. So this is partly how I'm changing it is by going to I went to Paul Cheeseman and said, let's change this. And he said, okay. To which I have worked with him on this, and then he's now on sabbatical. So he was like, go. And so that's kind of where we are. And today our what we're going to talk about is a little bit more of a foundation. I'm aware that some of this might be not necessarily new to you. Um, Hold on, let me just get this off. So I'm aware that some of this may not be necessarily new to you, um, but it's a good place to be as a foundation to kind of start. And so what we're going to look at is kind of understanding language and seeing people first. And this is actually something that I think so I'm going to just say crew and agape just because those are the two I'm most familiar with. But if it's called something else in your country, just know that we're all under the same umbrella. But this is something that I know crew and agape really focus on is people first and seeing people. And so really wanting to kind of think about that. Um, why does this matter? Why does having these conversations around neurodiversity, neurodivergent brains matter? Um, and this is a question I actually was asked by one of my supporting churches when I kind of was shifting roles. So I'm in a very weird role now. But they asked me, why does this matter? Why is this conversation important? And not in a bad way, but just in an understanding way. And the thing is it matters because people are not problems. And the language that we're going to talk about is a lot of problem language, which I'll get into in a minute. But the other thing is we want to see kind of things flourish, and there is things in the way. There are barriers that can be easily removed to help so that people are flourishing where they are, and kind of understanding language, being able to have that understanding of how to use language differently when interacting with different brain types can help so that there is better understanding and better kind of less friction in what we do. And so over the next few weeks, you will see this over the next 6 weeks. But just to say that we always want to be curious, never judgmental. We don't know, especially when we're working with people who haven't disclosed that they're neurodivergent or, haven't shared that. We don't want to make judgments. We always want to be understanding over fixing. People, like I said, are not problems to be fixed, but to be understood. Um, we want to be supporting as well. We want to be a place of belonging instead of fitting in, so allowing people to be them. And then also just, we have confidentiality. Yes, it is being recorded. So just be aware of that though, but there's confidentiality. I am not here to diagnose anyone. I can say, oh, that sounds like, or that might be, but my job, your job, if you aren't a doctor who's specifically trained in this, your job is not to diagnose. So we're not here to diagnose. And finally, just to say that I love participation. I don't have the chat currently open because my ADHD brain will go wild and we will get on tangents. But please put stuff in the chat. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Um, like I am all for participation, but it is optional because I recognize that some days that's not possible. So you will see this again many times, but I like to have just a good starting point. So let's kind of really start to dive in. And the first place I like to dive in is thinking about God's word. And what does it have to say about neurodivergent people? Because let's be honest, it doesn't actually say the word neurodivergent in the Bible. I have searched that just to double check. I have a master's in theology, and I'm pretty sure it's not, but let me check. But it does talk about how we are made in God's image. And I really found that powerful. So I have been diagnosed with ADHD about a year ago. I got a formal diagnosis, and I found just that reminder how my brain is different, but I'm still made in God's image, and that there's a reason that He has given me this type of brain. And it's really helped me shape actually not only how I approach myself and the grace I give myself, but also the grace I extend to my husband who is autistic, my child who is autistic and ADHD, and the many other people I work with who are neurodivergent. Because the thing is, when you meet one neurodivergent person, you have met one neurodivergent person. You ADHD is a very wide thing. Autism is a very wide spectrum, and we'll get into some other kind of profiles as well. So as we start, I'd just like to remind us all that we are all made in God's image, and not despite their brains, but including their brains, and kind of the idea that, they were given that brain for a reason. One thing I like to always add in is if you think about the things that make your life easier, one second, just a second, buddy. Okay. Sorry, one second. Um, so if you think about all the things that make your life easier, your phone, the internet, the computer, the car, airplanes, just to name a few, they were all created by someone who's neurodivergent. And I just think if we didn't have them, I know I would be very disconnected from my family. And so I'm grateful for those kinds of brains. So thinking about language and thinking about kind of how do we use language? I want you to just kind of first think about how you use language when it comes to the people you love. Thinking about, and you can put this in the chat. I will pull the chat up now, but I will pull it up and then put it back down. That's how my brain works. But in the chat, just think, what kind of words do you use to people that you love? Think about maybe if you have a spouse or your kids or parents, what kind of words do you use? Are they harsh? Are they kind? Put just a couple words in there that you use. Um, so things like I think about words that I would use to my husband are, kind of kinder words. They are, can't think of any exact words. I ask him about how his day is. I guess that's a phrase more. Um, you could think through. I just, you don't have to put them in the chat if you don't want to, but just that, think through, like the words that you use are probably a bit kinder. Think about words that you use or phrases or language that you use with colleagues. Still familiar, they're not going to be harsh things, right? But probably a little more formal, maybe. I think about, the texts I send my husband are like, get milk versus, if I were to ask my, my a colleague, I wouldn't probably just say, do this. I would probably say something a little bit more, um, could you please? Or, things like that. Um, so thinking about kind of that language and thinking about how we use language, it's important to think about, hold on, sorry, I'm just gonna, there we go. Thinking about, yeah, how we use language and doing that. It's important to also think about how words can mean certain things. So thinking about neuroaffirming does not ignore the challenges. It's not refusing or to reduce the problems people have, but it's not, and it's kind of changing that deficit to kind of more of a positive way. Now, I want to be clear, a lot of people do not like to think of their uh, personally, I'll just say personally, I don't necessarily say my ADHD is a superpower. I think there are elements that make my brain work better than other people and see the world in a different way. But I don't necessarily call it a superpower. But I do use neuroaffirming language. So things like my brain, it's a brain type. It's not a deficit. I believe those who are neurodivergent, wherever you are on the spectrum, going back to kind of that idea that we're made in God's image, we were made for that for a purpose and a reason that way, versus it being something to fix or I need to change how my brain works completely. Again, not saying there aren't challenges, but to kind of just be honest and say, we believe this is how God created us. So that's kind of what neuroaffirming language means, is that idea of it's not a what's wrong with them, but what helps them do their best. Sorry, one second. My child is, we had a we had McDonald's for lunch, I'm just gonna be honest. And my child is giving me his Happy Meal. So um so uh so just a few terms to think about. Neurodiversity is the kind of diversity of all brains. I like to call it the umbrella of all brain types. Just like we have diversity in culture and in personality, we have diversity in brains. One second. I think it's all gone. Okay. And so neurodiversity is, like I said, that umbrella. It's a big word. Everyone fits under the neurodiversity umbrella. We all have brains and we all fit under that umbrella. However, there are neurodivergent brains. This is, a word to describe someone whose brain looks and works differently. It's, kind of the idea that a neurodivergent person, will be someone who is on what I like to call the spectrum of spectrums and will sit kind of under that mini umbrella. So everyone sits under the umbrella of neurodiversity. And then there are two mini umbrellas, one which is neurodivergent and the other is neurotypical. So a neurotypical brain is described as a person whose brain works in ways that align more easily with the kind of default expectations is how we like to say, kind of the typical, quote unquote, typical way. So just to clarify again, umbrella, the big umbrella is neurodiversity. And it's important to think about this because um, a lot of people will talk. I mean, I was intentional about putting this word in neurodiversity in work because that's what the word everyone knows. Neurodiversity is that kind of big, in the UK especially, is a big buzzword. However, the right term is neurodivergent. So I would say everyone in this room, no matter your brain type, sits under that neurodiversity umbrella. However, I sit under that neurodivergent umbrella, and you may sit under that neurotypical umbrella. And being aware of that is helpful because it means that you know. When someone comes to me, I host a podcast. So I have another side job. And when someone comes to me and says, I want to talk about neurodiversity, and then they explain neurodivergent, I go, yeah, you're not quite the right fit. Not because of who they are, but just that they haven't done quite all the research and all know all the right language. So just to say that's something that is something to kind of think about is using that word. How do we use that word neurodiversity? And then how do we use the word neurodivergent? Okay, so this one I will say, if you would like to, in a moment, unmute yourself and just think through. Um, these are some ways that I want to kind of start to shift how we use that language. So these are some common labels that people not necessarily have said to me, but have said to other neurodivergent staff. But things like they're not a team player, they're too intense. I've been told I'm too over the top or I'm too much. They are disorganized. I've heard, that kind of always running behind kind of language. And all of these things might be true. They probably are true about something, that when being told them. And they come from a place of kind of that real friction. But these kind of labels are unhelpful for neurodivergent brains for a few reasons. One, they're labeling in a negative way, and thinking through how this is unhelpful to label someone negatively, but also it doesn't actually give them clear like instructions or clear understanding of what does being a team player mean? How are they not being a team player? You might think, oh, they're disorganized. Well, to them, having a messy desk, they know exactly where everything is on that desk. And if you move one piece of paper, they'll know. Now, it might look disorganized to you, but it's not. It's totally organized to them. And I know this because I live with someone who has this. But that idea that, saying they're disorganized can be actually really unhelpful because they don't know exactly what that means. And so I want you to just kind of think through for a second. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think through. How could you turn one of these phrases, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but I want you to start thinking, how can you turn one of these phrases, or maybe another phrase that you've heard, or it's been told to you, and how can you rewrite it as one of a curiosity statement? So one from judgment to curiosity. So an example that I'll just give really quickly for disorganized might be that they need a clear steps and less cognitive load, or maybe even just a completely different system. So that would be how I would say if someone was this is what I have said to my husband. Instead of saying you are so disorganized, I just say, okay, you just need some clearer steps. Let me help you unpack that. So thinking about that. So thinking about how can we do that? So I'm going to give you just a few seconds. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or ask as well. Yes.
I'm not sure if I understand correctly.
Mhm.
Do you want us to think just or to write or to
So
say?
all of the above.
Uh-huh.
If you want to share one, that would be great. I would
Mhm,
love to hear what you
mhm,
think could be a way that you could kind of do that curiosity statement.
mhm,
There's no right or wrong, just to say I am
mhm,
uh I have many degrees and one of them
mhm,
is in teaching and
mhm,
I'm a firm believer of no bad questions. So
mhm. Yeah.
um yeah. So
Okay, so I would ask For example, I have two, one nephew and one. She's a girl. I don't know what's correct word, but
Yeah.
uh, they don't like too many questions, but some questions they answer. And I would like to ask them, for example, Ben, my nephew, uh, what do you, how do you uh, prefer to work together with people or alone?
Yep. And that is actually a perfect question to ask because it's in the form of a question. A way, so let's reverse that. So if you ask, hey, would you like to work alone or with
Mhm,
people? That's perfect. That's a curiosity
mhm,
statement.
mhm,
So let's reverse that and you say, oh, you need to work alone because you get distracted. That would be a judgment statement because
mhm, mhm,
you're putting them into a label, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So
mhm,
how you've asked that is perfect. That's the curiosity thing. You want to
mhm.
ask that kind of
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
So
and I want to say that every mm, uh, every uh, statement from this on the slide, they are true to normal people.
yep,
They
yep,
can be true to normal people.
yes, they
So,
can be true to
and
neurotypical people as
yeah,
well. Yeah,
yeah.
yep. And a
Mm,
lot of what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about some kind of practical things
mhm,
in a little bit, is
mhm,
so there's a big kind of, I don't know if debate's the right word, but conversation, we'll just say, um, particularly in the UK, the US, and even Australia, um, about accommodations and accommodations in schools for children who have additional needs, but also accommodations in work, and how a lot of people see accommodations, quote unquote, as a step ahead of other people. But actually, accommodations aren't just for neurodivergent people. And in reality, they just help them get to the same starting line as a neurotypical person.
mhm,
But when you allow accommodation for everyone, it it helps everyone. So this is just a side note, but like headphones, wearing headphones while you work can really help a neurodivergent person. If I have to go into the office, I will wear headphones a lot because I find the noise to be really distracting. A study was done that they took 50% neurodivergent, 50% neurotypical, gave them all headphones and said work, and they found that actually everyone had the same productivity. And the neurodivergent person actually worked harder than the neurotypical, but the neurotypical person was still productive and actually enjoyed it better as well. So that accommodation was for everyone, and it helped everyone as well, which is great. Um, so okay. So just thinking about these phrases, we're gonna kind of think about them in a little bit as well. But thinking about being curious, having these curiosity statements or phrases or questions is where we want to head to instead of kind of those judgment or labels. Um, so like I said, what is fully neuroaffirming? It is recognizing let's kind of, yeah, define this a little bit better. So neuroaffirming means we recognize neurodivergence as part of the natural variation of humans. And we're actively building environments where neurodivergent people can belong and contribute. And I think it's important to think about not just that first part of the statement, that we, recognize it's a natural variation, but it's that also building environments where people who are neurodivergent can belong and can contribute. And that is where, partly where crew has a great opportunity to do this. I'm not saying they're not doing this, I should clarify, but to make sure that each ministry, each area is building environments for this. And it's kind of things that shift are going from compliance, so you will work this way, to understanding. So, oh, I understand that working from 9 to 5 does not work for your brain, but actually working from 9 to 11 and then 2 to 8 works better for your brain. So let's work that way. Instead of thinking about, um, you know, everyone will do it this way, you turn it to understanding and realize that no matter our brain types, we all work differently, right? So, kind of that understanding. And then thinking about behavior. So, kind of that from behavior only to a nervous system awareness. And so again, thinking about we've always done it this way, to actually let's think about how this might fit for different people. How can our nervous systems be not so overwhelmed? How can we think through the a lot of times it is often the behavior is often the we've always done it this way. I hear that a lot. And instead going, okay, but this it's not working for this type of brain or this person even. So thinking about how can we help their nervous system because a lot of time those who are overwhelmed, who are neurodivergent, is because their nervous system doesn't feel safe. Safety is a big thing, and they don't feel safe. And so, how can we create environments where neurodivergent people can feel safe? And that's there's a lot of safe in that. That's a whole nother thing we'll talk about later, but wanting to just think about that. The other kind of thing is thinking about to try harder. This is something that um, we I hear a lot more in the parenting side of things that I do. You need to just parent harder, have stricter boundaries, those kinds of things. But instead, actually taking that back and reducing that barrier to see why is that happening. So thinking about, again, this is kind of more of a parenting side, but it does happen. Adults do have meltdowns as well in the workplace. But thinking about why is a meltdown happening, and how can we reduce the triggers to those types of things. So in the workplace, it could be why are you never hitting targets? Instead of just saying try harder, it could be, oh, I realize that Fridays just don't work for you. So let's always do, you know, that on a Monday or something like that. That kind of idea. And then the kind of final neuroaffirming kind of thing is that there's one way. I don't know about you, but I've had people say there's one way, it's my way, or you're out. I always say the highway or no way. But also in that kind of neuroaffirming way, when you're building environments that, where neurodivergent people can belong and contribute, you start to break that down and see that there's multiple ways. I like to use the example that you have a like petrol or gas car, and then you have an electric car. And you're on a trip. I always like to, I'm in the UK, so I'll say from Birmingham to London. My husband's in the petrol car and I'm in the electric car. And he's going to go and I'm going to go. And we're both going to get to London, but the way I have to go is slightly different because I might need to charge up halfway through. And I have to go to a special charging station. And he will have to potentially get petrol or gas partway through, but that's a different station. So our routes might be different, but we're still getting to London. um, Also, if you've ever driven London, you always want to take electric car. I'll just give that a shout out. But but that kind of idea, that way of there are multiple good ways to get there. And sometimes as leaders, we need to be able to take a step back and say, my goal is for you to get to this point. My goal is for you to get to London. I don't care how you do it. And I know sometimes as leaders, that can be really hard, because we want to be able to, I always say, this is more of a joke, which Paul Cheeseman and I have laughed out about many times. Leaders are very good at are often micromanagers who get a big shiny hat, because we like to help along the way, whatever that looks like. And then sometimes that can be hard for that person, but sometimes the best leader is just saying, "Hey, I want you to get to London. You do it your way, and I'm going to take my hands off." So thinking about that, that's kind of a big way of nerve affirming. I'm going to just take a 30-second break because my son needs his headphones. So we'll just take a quick break, just do a little shake, and I'll be right back. Um, Hold on. Okay. Hello. Sorry about that. It was a quick break. We can still have a break if we um still need. We'll do another one in a little bit. It was just my son needed uh needed a minute. So like I said, today we're lifing, so that's where we are. The last thing I want to say about kind of neuroaffirming language and that idea of building environments where people who are neurodivergent belong is that we're not lowering standards. I think sometimes people feel that's what's happening, is we're lowering the standard for one person but not for someone else. And the reality is we're not lowering standards, we're just making it possible for them to arrive at their destination. I'm going to use that example again of heading to London. We are not lowering by going in an electric car. That's not a lower standard. It's just a different way, and we're still allowing it to be a way that can get us to London. And so when we talk about neuroaffirming environments and building neuroaffirming even movements, we're not talking about that lowering of standards. We're not talking about having one way, for one person and not wanting it to be equal or fair for the other person, but rather just saying we're making it accessible for everyone. Okay, so oh, hold on, sorry. Okay, we're not going to go into groups. This is for when I've done part of this training with some kind of wider church leaders, and we're not going to go into groups. But I would love for you to think and then put either unmute yourself or put in the chat. What are some kind of what could a neuroaffirming team or environment kind of look like? What could, you know, it says name three words. Feel free to say whatever, however you want. But kind of just think through, what is a truly neuroaffirming team feel like for a neurodivergent staff member? Now, I know some of you might be neurodivergent, so you can think of even how you would want it for yourself. But kind of what kind of words or things come to mind that you feel like would make a neuroaffirming team? And they could be both practical or even theory ideas. So um, I'll name a few just to get your brain going. Is one is having a longer flexible start time. So something that is, I hadn't realized, I appreciate how much in the UK, but they'll say, oh, we'll start at 6:30 for a dead start or a hard start at 6:45, meaning come for 6:30, get yourself a cup of tea. They love a good cup of tea in England, but we are going to start that meeting at 6:45. Like you will be classed as late at 6:46. So things like that. So that's kind of some kind of that, and that isn't specifically neuroaffirming, but that is something that helps kind of bring neuroaffirming into an atmosphere. So it doesn't have to use again. That's an example that everyone benefits from, right? It's not a only neurodivergent people are told this information. It's everyone's told this information. Everyone understands the expectation of, kind of that doors open at this time, but the meeting will definitely start at this time. So feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat anything that you feel would be a neuroaffirming kind of team or even atmosphere. So we're gonna keep going. So hold on, sorry, okay. So we're gonna look at some profiles because I think it's important to kind of understand profiles and how they bring different things to things. Now, I will just be very clear, these are very much generalized and very I've kind of gone big picture. So please, this is not the end all. This is not an exhaustive list. This is simply more of a kind of uh, yeah, what's come up with and kind of some ways. So this is just to get started. So thinking about autism, something that is a neuroaffirming way is to say an autistic person instead of saying someone with autism. Now, if someone introduces themselves and says, I have autism, then we can go with that language. That's a whole nother debate for a whole nother time. But for now, we're going to say autistic people. And they often experience the world in heightened detail. So they can see strong patterns. My son can see a pattern in almost everything. It is amazing. Also, sometimes frustrating when you are trying to get to school on time. And often need deep clarity and predictability. So my son likes to have a detailed plan. He likes a minute by minute plan is what we go through. He likes to know what's going to happen. He likes to know those kinds of things. Some common strengths of autistic people is that they can bring honesty. They are one of the most loyal people you will meet. They have deep focus and excellent memory for detail. Again, when I tell you my son can remember something that I said 5 years ago, again, it's a blessing and a curse because it also means he remembers things about people that kind of sometimes surprises you. And I love that about him and other autistic people I've seen as well. So, some common struggles that they experience is they have sensory overload, social kind of experiences, ambiguities, kind of those what's not actually said kind of things, fast changing plans, unclear expectations. This is a big one, and exhaustion from masking. So, trying to fit in to where they are. Um, Particularly women who are autistic, they can become very easily become a chameleon and kind of fit into their social things. And so it's often girls and women are, there's a high proportion of them who are diagnosed later in life. Um, and it can be very hard. So masking is very tiring as well. So, what this can look like in kind of a ministry context is someone who is brilliant one-to-one, who has great conversations one-to-one, but when it becomes a big group, can be very overwhelmed. Is very committed usually, and often highly thoughtful, but they also leave meetings drained, and they struggle when things are last minute changes or without an explanation. So, things that can be helpful for them. And this is works. I'll give some kind of more concrete examples in a minute, but things that help is clarity, predictability, written information, time to process. So, making decisions in the moment is not always great, and leaders who say what they mean. So, a few examples, and some of this will kind of overlap with different things. So, just be mindful of that. But so some examples of predictability is having a clear kind of, we do team time at this time. For example, Monday mornings at 9 o'clock, we will always do 30 minutes of team time and respecting that 30 minutes. Don't let it go over. If it's shorter, that's probably easier. But if it goes over, it often can be stressful. Then it might be we always, so the idea of Mondays, we always do this. I don't think every team meets every day, but if you do, kind of having what is predictable, you know what is happening. And if you have team meetings where decisions need to be made, having that said before the meeting starts or even at the start of the meeting sets good expectations. One of the things that I've done when I was leading a team a few years ago was I would send out the agenda, and in the agenda, I would say, we need to make a decision on this, or this is not a time to make a decision. We are just brainstorming. And it was actually changed how the meeting ran and made it more productive because people knew we need to get serious about this and make a decision. Or actually, I want to dream big, let's brainstorm, or whatever that kind of topic is. And so thinking about that, I am always for sending out a schedule or an agenda beforehand. Again, that gives people time to process. And again, it helps everyone in the room know exactly what's going to be discussed because no one likes going to a meeting and not really know what's happening. But then also it gives everyone again in the room know this is what needs to be decided and this isn't because you might have different expectations. I might think, oh, everything needs to be a decision in this meeting. And the leader of the meeting might think everything's just brainstorming. And there can be a disconnect. So having those kind of clear things beforehand. Thinking about ADHD. So people with ADHD often experience attention or interest based rather than important based. I will talk about that more. That's very much my life. But that means something that is urgent or boring can be very hard to do, while something that is meaningful can unlock an intense focus. So give me something I enjoy, I will focus on that. I enjoy reading. If I find a book that I like totally lock in on, is what I call it, I will read that book in probably a day, even if it's 500 pages long, because I will just, that's all I do for that day is like, because I'm so focused on that. Knowing that maybe I need to clean my house, that's boring. I don't want to do that. Not going to do that. Maybe there's an email that I don't want to send. That can wait. That's no longer urgent because I have unlocked my focus. Some common strengths can include creativity, humor, energy, problem solving, big picture vision, and rapid idea generation. So, again, if I know a decision doesn't need to be made about something and the meeting is just ideas, I love it because I can just sit and just spout ideas, especially when I don't have to implement the ideas, because I can just think through and dream bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, kind of that idea. Common struggles, though, can include working memory, time awareness, admin, transitions between tasks, transition initiation, and staying regulated when overwhelmed. So, again, just speaking from personal experience, I am really bad at time awareness. I have reminders that go off for like if I have a meeting, it goes off in an hour, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, and 5 minutes. And even between that 5 minute mark, there's still a high possibility that I will forget what time it is or think I can get one more task done. And that one task turns into a 20-minute thing. And so then I'm late. So in ministry, it could be someone who is brilliant with people, full of ideas, and quick to respond in a crisis. One thing that um, hasn't totally been scientifically proven, I think we'll get there, is that ADHD brains are actually your best crisis managers because they are perfect in a crisis. But ADHD brains can get stuck on follow-up tasks, written reports, long meetings, and not having clear action points. So what can help is breaking tasks into steps. Then this might mean having to have someone help you do that. Clear deadlines, accountability that is supportive and not shaming, and systems that reduce that cognitive load. So having kind of things think through that a little bit. Having someone, let me start again, sorry. Having someone who I have planned events as part of my job within Agape, and I have someone who helps me go through the event, and we go through, and it is something that it's kind of you often repeat, rinse and repeat, but I always go through with someone and we talk out every step, every kind of transition that happens to make sure that I don't forget something, but also helps kind of make sure those steps are actually doable. So I'm aware of time, and we've been at this for a while. So we're gonna take a like 10-minute break. Also, so then I can get my kids more snacks. That's how I keep them somewhat quiet is making sure they have lots of snacks. So we're gonna just take a 10-minute break, which means we'll be back at like 2 my time, if I'm reading that correctly. Um, if I'm reading my clock correctly. So we'll be back shortly. Okay, we're gonna start back just to keep going. We are yeah, not much longer. I say that very hesitantly. But we're gonna just keep going. So we're gonna talk about dyslexia, which is another neurodivergent profile. And I should have clarified, we're only going over four profiles. I will name a few others at the end that sit under that neurodivergent kind of mini umbrella. And we're only going over the top four just because there are so many. And so dyslexia is often misunderstood as simply a reading difficulty, but many dyslexic people are strong, big picture thinkers. They're visual processors, so the idea of seeing things, and have are great at creative problem solving. Some strengths can include storytelling and innovation, relational into relational intuition. So kind of I have a friend who's dyslexic who I always like to say she's the thermometer of the room. She can walk into a room and really get a sense of what the vibe of the room is really quickly. Also, strategic thinking and seeing connections that others miss. So, not always patterns, but seeing connections. So, seeing how different things kind of fit. I also like to think of them as like a puzzle piece maker or kind of overseer. So struggles can include reading or like heavy processing when reading, quick note taking, long written instructions, spelling under pressure, being judged as careless when the real issue is actually the processing and kind of that process time. So in a ministry context, this might look like someone who is brilliant at having conversations, kind of doing discipleship, that one-to-one verbal connection, maybe given vision and strategy, but can also feel really drained by filling in forms, by, doing those long documents, by being asked to produce kind of polished writing, especially under pressure. So, uh, what helps is offering information in multiple formats, allowing voice notes. I will just say, even as an ADHD brain, I love a good voice note because I find I'm much better verbal processing and talking it out than writing. So reducing unnecessarily written load and then making space for proofreading or support where needed. Again, I am not dyslexic. I was tested for that a while ago because I was like, maybe I am. And but I still find all of these things, voice notes, proofreading, thinking about how to kind of reduce that written load can be helpful. And I love to like think as well, again, this is going to all brain types, neurodiversity of like how who loves a voice note versus not. And it's so interesting. I find a lot of moms do a lot of voice notes and men, I shouldn't say all dads, but men don't often. So it's something I like to think about. The next one is um, dyspraxia. So, dyspraxia can affect the coordination, sequencing, organization, sometimes the speech or processing speed. It is often something that a lot of people don't see. There's a lot of times there aren't really well, all of these are classed as invisible disabilities, but this one in particular is probably um the hardest to see, if that makes any sense, if that's at all possible. But the idea that it's invisible and people carry a lot of shame because of these things. So some strengths can include persistence, empathy, creative thinking, problem solving, and strong verbal reasoning. However, some struggles can include the kind of multi-step tasks, forming like all the forms, filling those in, time management, spatial organization, and fatigue. So spraxia is something that they will overcommit often. They, the idea of this kind of organization having, I don't want to say everyone with a messy desk is dyspraxic, but the idea that, that is organization is really hard for them both physically and kind of in their mind. So in ministry, the context, this might look like someone who is faithful, thoughtful, and deeply committed, but who feels overwhelmed by logistics. Traveling can be very difficult, or even kind of multitasking expectations. Something that I think about, there's someone I know who, um, just a second. Yes. Sorry, we made cookies earlier and now they're now they're ready to eat. Um, but I think about someone who I've worked with who I don't know if they're dyspraxic or not, but they really struggle with the logistics of things. And so, because I know this and because of events that I do, I will send them a specific email with kind of really step down, like, okay, you need to do this with this link. And it does mean I have more work for me. And you know, I remember there are times when I've said people are adults, they should be able to, but I just know that it helps them and reduces the stress for them, which also reduces the stress for me because I'm not getting emails all the time. So things like that is kind of a idea of how logistics can be. So what helps is that clear step-by-step instructions. Like I mentioned, I will send them an email and say, first you need to book flights. Here's the link to book a flight. And then after you've booked your flight, you need to do your travel insurance. Here's the link for that. And so those step-by-step instructions, supporting with sequencing. So first, second, third. I'm reducing time pressure when possible. Recognize that's not always possible, but also giving as much time as possible. So, you know, knowing we're traveling in 3 months, I will send this email now and say this, these are the instructions. This is how you do it. Just remember this is the date for things. So, thinking about these are, like I said, these are the top four that are kind of diagnosed in the world. What other things that sit under the neurodivergent umbrella is things like bipolar sit under there. And mental health technically sits under there. I like to kind of say it's also like a sub one because there's other things in there that um, are all part of it. But partly also I see it sit under there because a lot of times those who are on the spectrum of spectrums, so under the neurodivergent umbrella, will struggle with mental health at various points for various reasons. And so it's I like to call it a comorbidity, which is that kind of cousin to something is how I like to do that. So yeah, so there's bipolar, there's Tourette's, um, there's kind of like I mentioned, mental health. I am missing quite a few. There's about, I think, 12 different things that sit under the neurodivergent umbrella. You can always Google it. I will just be honest. Google what is neurodivergent or what sits under the neurodivergent umbrella, and you'll get a list. So I want you to just think for a minute, think through. Again, we're not going to go into breakout rooms necessarily, but think through one profile that we just discussed out of the four. And I just want you to think through what is one strength or two strengths that they bring, one barrier that you see in your context, and one simple adjustment that might help. And think through that for a minute. I'm going to share a few ideas, particularly around kind of adjustments, because adjustments don't have to cost lots of money. They can be things that are very easy. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think, and then we'll keep going. Okay. So thinking about adjustments, I'm going to share a lot with you right now. So you might need to uh, listen and then retake retake this in because there's going to be quite a few. I'm going to share a list and I'll be sharing more throughout the 6 weeks, but thinking about some easy adjustments that you can kind of start making. One of them is how you do emails. Now, I don't know about you, but the email I wrote yesterday, some of you will have loved it. Some of you have been like, this is a kind of weird email. And I did it intentionally. You'll notice first, I don't ask how you are at the start. Um, for a lot of neurodivergent people, they struggle with that question because they don't know how you want them to answer. So I didn't ask you, how are you, or anything like that. Um, and now that might seem normal to some people. That's totally fine. Some people in England, I remember about 10 years ago, I had a feedback time with my line manager and they were like, can you please add that in? And I was like, oh, okay. So, culturally depends on where you are. You may not have noticed that was not there, but if you were in the UK, you would have. But the idea of I didn't ask how you are because people don't know how to answer that question. So didn't ask that. You'll notice in the email as well, I said my goal for the session is, and then I explained. Again, I set that clear expectation of what I was wanting from this session, and I gave it to you ahead of time. So you knew what you were coming into. You knew kind of that expectation, right? And I also made it clear in one section where you could get all the links. There weren't links throughout the email. There weren't highlighted text throughout the email. There was one key spot at the bottom that said key information, and that's where it was. So again, if you're writing a maybe longer email, because I'm aware there are some people who love every detail and want every detail. Like I said, I have planned many events where I have people wanting all of the details. Sometimes I don't have them all, but I try. And then there's some people who want the bullet points. They just want the highlights. They want the key information. And so when you can, if you're particularly if you're writing to a group, if you're just writing to one person and you know what they want, obviously write to them. But if you're writing in a group, have kind of both elements in there where you give more information, kind of a longer explanation, but then you have a section that is the key bullet points, the key things you want them to remember, for again using events, I put the key dates for things and any links that go with that. So key information, again, having that there. It can be at the bottom or it can even be at the top. I find the bottom is better because then you get more people reading it and not just seeing the key information and then not actually reading anything else. But things like that. That's an email that is great. Again, not for every brain type, but for all brain types. I know people who are not neurodivergent who love having that key information box or kind of section because they know they save that email and they know where all the links are. They know they can go back to that email and get all the links and not have to keep searching. So it's just something to think about when writing emails, particularly to larger groups. I'm again not thinking necessarily one-to-one. You don't have to always do that if you know they respond better. And if you're talking to someone who's one-to-one, again, no matter the brain type, if they like more details or not because they will either if they like a lot of detail, they will go, great, email, thanks, and will act on it. If they don't like a lot of detail, they will ask you questions about things you've put in your previous email. So just a little shout out of things I've learned. But so that's an adjustment is thinking about how you communicate information and having that key. I call it a box. It's not a box, it's just a little thing at the bottom of the email, but having that key information, key dates, that at the bottom of the email. Another adjustment that you can make is if you do a lot of online like calls with people that you know are neurodivergent, having sending out reminders. I'll be honest, I in my kind of other role, I have automatic reminders that get sent out. You will see some, you'll see some coming through. I will be sharing some of that as well, just so you can see how to kind of do that. But sending those 24 hours, I mean, you don't go crazy. Don't like spam them with like 24 hours, 12 hours, 2 hours, one, like don't do that. You don't need to spam. But, sending that 24-hour email, especially if it's been booked way in advance. Sending that hour email beforehand or 15-minute email is great. And if you can do it automated, which some places you can, some places you can't, again, just means you don't have to do it. You set it up once and then it just goes out. But it helps a neurodivergent person know exactly and reminds them. The amount of times I am so grateful for that 24-hour email that I've gotten from people saying, this meeting's happening. So that's another kind of quick reminder of way to kind of help people be ready. And the final thing is we've talked a little bit about expectations, but having a visual expectation of the meeting. So in schools, a study was done both in the US and in the UK where they had visual timetables in the classroom. So a visual timetable, it looked in different formats. This is for both they did this in primary and in secondary here in the UK. In the US, I think it was just in elementary. But they have a visual timetable. So the children knew, particularly those in elementary, knew what their whole day was going to look like. Those in secondary knew what their lesson or that kind of class was going to look like. And they found that the children who had that visual timetable all children felt secure and safe. The classrooms that didn't have that visual timetable felt more on edge, felt like it was a whole kind of unpredictable time. And so now in the UK, I love saying this in the UK, visual timetables in primary schools. Secondary schools are getting there, but in primary schools are required because they found that children felt safe. So why don't we do this in meetings? Now, I've already talked about how you can send agenda or outline ahead of time, which again, I will show you. Some templates that I've used. Again, it's just a copy and paste a lot of times. But also having them at the bottom of your screen if you have a slideshow. You'll see it next week. But seeing as we go through kind of different things and different pictures. Now, there's a program called Widget, which is universally known in the West for kind of universal photos, which I'll kind of show you, which you can use for adults. It's something that is used across the board. And I'll just say this is something we've implemented in our church. So on a Sunday morning, we have the visual timetable at the bottom of the screen. And after certain songs or activities or whatever, they will come, they just kind of come off. So it's just a picture of someone singing, someone praying, singing, like it just is there. And we have found it not just help those who are neurodivergent, but those who are new to the church to know exactly what is going to happen. They know, right, we're going to sing. We know we're going to be praying. We know we're going to be singing some more or whatever. And it's been really fun to see how the church has grown. Again, not just with neurodivergent brains, but with people who feel safe in the church because they know what the expectation is. We also have someone who verbally starts the service and says, "This is our plan for today." So not only do we have it visually up, but we also have it verbally shared as well. So again, starting your meeting with, "Hey, this is the plan for this meeting," and quickly going through it. You just, don't mumble your way through, but just quickly going through it. So those are some ideas that you could use and start implementing. Um, I'll be sharing way more. I will be putting together a list, kind of a running Google Doc with the kind of different things that I share, so you can go back to as well. But those are all free things. Yes, they take your time a little bit more, but I can't express enough what a difference you will see in those you're working with in kind of teams and group meetings, in group settings, and even one-to-one. People will feel safe because you are doing these things. And so even one-to-one, they will feel different and you will see your teams be more productive. You'll see them making good decisions and better decisions because they know the expectations of those things. So that's my a little bit of a soapbox, but that's what the thing is. So the next thing is thinking about kind of the gap and kind of bringing together both the person, because they're rarely the problem, but the environment. And that idea that environment can include the pace and the urgency, how meetings are run, how instructions are given, how decisions are communicated, how flexible the culture is, and what is rewarded and what is judged. So thinking about those things, thinking about pace and urgency. A lot of neurodivergent brains really struggle when you say, "I need this now," instead of being able to say, "Hey, can I have this tomorrow?" I know there are some things that happen and you do need it now. And I understand that, but if it's always now that you need it, it's going to become very difficult to trust when you actually need something now and when you don't need something now, because how can you need everything now, right? And so thinking about that, thinking about the urgency, thinking about the pace, how can I make sure that, a person I'm working with has the longest run-up time that they can possibly have. Also, I find this is a slightly side note, but when someone says to me end of day, I always think, what does your end of day mean? Because for me, because I work very kind of different schedules with having kids, my end of day sometimes isn't until 9 p.m. Now, bear in mind, I also work with different cultures, and so who are in the US and who are in Australia and different places, and so again, like I have very weird working hours. I'm very aware of that. But what does that actually mean when someone says end of day? So being clear on that, how meetings are run and how instructions are given. Again, I've already talked about meetings, so I don't think we need to talk too much about that. But the idea of instructions, how instructions are given, I have seen and been a part of this myself. So please know I'm not saying I've conquered this or overcome this, but we give a lot of instructions verbally. And I know for myself, I struggle with verbal instructions to the point where I often tell my husband if he wants me to do something, we are sitting next to each other. I'm like, can you text that to me so I can see it and read it and then understand what he's saying? So think about how you give instructions. Is it something that you can pre-write out and send it out, while you're giving it to them? Is it something that you can have up on on the board or wherever on the screen? So again, people can visually see the instructions. And then how decisions are communicated. This is another really big one, because it's setting that expectation. A lot of this comes down to expectations. But saying we're gonna have a decision by Friday, we will communicate it to everyone by Monday. And then Monday comes and nothing is said. Even if you have to say, hey, the decision's taken longer, we're gonna need a couple more days, or saying that gives clarity, it gives that expectation, and it creates a safe environment. So thinking about how decisions are communicated, and again, thinking about how are we verbally communicating this decision? Is there a way we can write it down? Are we only going to write it down, but maybe we could send also it in a voice note for someone? Just thinking through how can we diversify, that's the word, I think, like how things are done. So neurodivergent people, I'm not going to go through the last ones, but neurodivergent people spend a lot of energy adapting to the environment. And when that energy runs out, you will then start to see that kind of overwhelm, and overload, and sometimes even leading to people into burnout, which then means they go off sick. And so when we can make little changes to the environment, it means we can make sure that our people are healthy, they feel safe, and that they are wanting to do their job. I feel like there was a season where I was in burnout, and I went on a reduced timetable. I was doing a lot, I'd overcommitted, and um, I just remember thinking how after that time of burnout, I came back and made some changes, and how those little changes made my day actually a lot better and easier. So I could actually, it made my capacity even more because I made little changes. And so just thinking about that kind of idea, and thinking about your context. I'm aware that we are in different cultures, in different places around the world, and different cultures have different thoughts on different things. I love working with people in Africa because they're a little more flexible when it comes to time. Whereas in the UK, you are on time. I also grew up in a military home, so you were on time, we'll just say. And so thinking about your context and your cultures also will kind of be a lens, I guess I want to say, in how you um, change your environment. You can't change a whole country into being on time overnight or even at all. Let's be honest, right? You can't change a whole culture to all of a sudden make meetings on time. But you can set other things up so that people are kind of more on time or not coming in different ways. So just over the next few kind of days and weeks, I want you to kind of think about the idea. How can, in your context, what is one default expectation that might unintentionally make it harder for neurodivergent staff? Those fast replies, the long meetings, the last minute changes, or even the vague tasks. What is something that you can kind of start doing? And it's a trial and error. We're all learning, that you could potentially do. And I want to just highlight that this idea is, I say my whole life is about tweaking and pivoting. Um, Raising a child who's neurodivergent, we are constantly pivoting things. What's the environment like? Where, how is he overstimulated, not overstimulated? Like, constantly, I'm always scanning and tweaking and pivoting. And I think that's just overall life, not just as a neurodivergent family, but as a leader. We are tweaking and pivoting. And so, kind of, how can we start making those little tweaks that bring awareness that creates the change? So this week, uh, I don't like to call it homework because that makes it way less fun. And like, I want this to become part of everyday life and not just for 1 week. But how can you be noticing your language? How could you notice the environment barriers around you? And what is a small shift that you can make? It says choose one, so just choose one. Notice your language, notice the environment, notice the small shift that you can make. Maybe that's the um, allowing someone longer lead time. Maybe that's sending a voice note to someone that has said previously they struggle with long emails. Or maybe it's sending an email to someone who says, I really struggle with instructions being told verbally. Um, so I would love for you to kind of think through what is something that you can be doing this week. Um, the other thing is that small shift. Another idea of that small shift is that clear sending agendas, writing up follow up emails or sending something out ahead of time, trying to manage last minute changes, and even being clear on what the expectation is. So we have come to the end of this. I think that's, yeah, we have come to the end of our time. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. But just to say that I am, yes, very grateful that you all have joined in and are watching on replays as well. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I will just explain that I am currently seconded, so I'm on loan, is how I like to say it, from Agape to work alongside my church. So I have put my email, my church email in the original email, and I'll keep putting it in the future emails. But if you do get an email from that, so it's not a Crew or Agape email. It's simply because that's how they're integrated kind of as one. And so, yes, that is why. And I don't check my Agape properly, emails properly, as much as I do with my church ones. So I just wanted to explain that, and explain that if you do get an email from me, but it's not quite a Crew or Agape email, that is why. So it was lovely to see you all. It was great to be with you. And if you have questions, always please reach out. And I'd love to chat with you more. And we will see you next week.